What makes for a great LEGO castle sub-theme? A vast array of sets to choose from? Giant, sprawling structures? Or maybe armies of knights ready to defend their king's honor? Those are, admittedly, all great qualities, but I don't think they're necessary. Sometimes all you need for greatness is a ragtag band of rebels hailing from the trees. Starkly different from anything seen before in the castle theme, or any other theme for that matter, the Forestmen swung out of LEGO factories and into our hearts in 1987 with just a single set, 6066 Camouflaged Outpost. Over the next 3 years, the Forestmen continued to expand their woodland domain, but would ultimately only lay claim to 7 sets, culminating beautifully in 1990 with the subject of today's video. But those handful of sets were more than enough to cement their legend in the annals of LEGO castle history. So let's find out why, after all these years and despite such an abbreviated lifespan, the Legoland Forestmen continue to steal the hearts of builders and collectors across the globe. Welcome to TrikBrix. Hello again everyone, I'm Jamie. I feel incredibly fortunate to be able to showcase such a rare and iconic set for you today, as we continue our journey through the TrikBrix Castle Retrospective. 6071 Forestman's Crossing is something I had always had my eye on, but it wasn't until I accidentally hit the jackpot in 2019 with the $50 Hall of Halls that it found its way into my collection, and I've loved it ever since. Released in 1990, it contains 207 pieces, 5 minifigures, and retailed for $28.50. Today, that's roughly $70 adjusted for inflation. Curiously, Brickset has this listed as a limited retail release, but I couldn't locate any specifics on that, so feel free to enlighten me in the comments if you're able. Unfortunately, I don't have the box or the instructions to show you, but once again, backoftheboxbuilds.com comes to the rescue. The artwork and photography on display here is so amazing, from the cover, to the box flap, to the back, which showcases some pretty great alt builds. But enough pictures, let's check out the real thing. One area LEGO excelled in during the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s was creating fantastic mid-range sets. It seems like today something needs to have thousands of pieces to be considered amazing, but that isn't the case here. Beginning with the foundation, this set-exclusive, printed 16x32 baseplate is one of the highlights here, and represents the rarest and most valuable part of the set, excluding minifigures. It features a small stream winding its way through the middle, as well as a tiny pool or spring here in the corner. One thing I'm not crazy about, however, is that if we take a look at this by itself, you'll see all these little white dots on top of some of the studs. This was done to ensure that kids knew exactly where things were supposed to go when constructing the official build, but if you wanted to use this for something else, they kinda stick out like a sore thumb. These marker dots can be found on other old base plates as well, and I'm glad the practice didn't stick around. The other downside worth pointing out is that this brook doesn't line up with any other printed base plates, or even with itself for that matter, if you're fortunate enough to have 2 of them. This can make adding it to a layout a bit more challenging. That said, it looks beautiful all on its own. With everything back in place, we begin our tour on the left with this obviously man-made structure. You could see this as something the Forestmen built, but in my mind, it's way more interesting to imagine that this is part of some old ruins that have been reclaimed by nature, perhaps part of an abandoned Lion Knight's outpost, and our gang of lovable lawbreakers have just repurposed it for their own needs. You can see that a tree is growing from the corner here, and in fact, there are quite a few bits of flora taking over the structure. I love this overgrown look, and the marriage of stonework and nature could not have been executed more perfectly at the time. This aesthetic is really one of the big reasons the Forestmen are my favorite castle faction, and it was unlike anything we'd ever seen in LEGO at the time. We've got a few scattered windows to let some light in, as well as one of these classic shields hanging on the facade. Right below that is this treasure chest, inside of which we'll find a few yellow pips representing gold, which, if you didn't know, used to come on a sprue like this. I do find it interesting that this trend of using studs for treasure continued, despite the, dare I say, better option that was introduced in the previous year's pirate sets, but I can certainly appreciate the simple charm in these. And I'm proud to say that I'm no expert in thievery, but if I were, I don't think I'd just leave this sitting outside. On the other hand, you could see this as a trap to lure in unsuspecting passers-by, in order to alleviate them from their heavy gold burdens. The Forestmen are a pretty wily bunch, so I wouldn't put it past them. But if you did want to keep this safely stored away, it's as easy as opening this well-camouflaged front door. I say easy, but it's a bit of a tight squeeze for adult-sized hands. Luckily, there's also a back door. I actually believe that this is purely for interior access, rather than being an in-universe entrance. And per the instructions, it's pretty bare inside. What a lot of people today would consider to be a shortcoming of vintage LEGO, not having predetermined details covering every single stud, I see as one of its greatest strengths. Back then, we didn't say, "Ew, it's so plain and boring." We said, "Look at all this space for adding our own stuff." As you can see, there's plenty of room here to let your imagination breathe, and it's easy to add things like wine barrels, a table, some chairs, or perhaps the space is purely for storing treasure. It's totally up to you. Have some fun with it. Make it your own. That's what LEGO used to be all about. Back outside, it's hard to miss the fact that we've got 2 additional levels here, but in order to access them, we'll need to make our way across the brook. And while I think we could safely hop over it, it'd be way more fun to take the family horse out for a spin. Understandably, the Forestmen never had any special barding or anything like that, so this is as elaborate as their steeds got. I do appreciate how nicely the white horse and red saddle stand out against the rest of the build. And take note that this saddle is of the old single clip variety. The instructions show him transporting this merry man, although I'm sure he'd be just fine lugging any one of these folks around. Of the 5 minifigures we get, 3 share a similar design sporting various accent colors, 1 features a V-neck shirt complete with money pouch, and last but most definitely not least is the Forest Woman, a very rare, very expensive, technically set-exclusive figure. She did see a re-release of sorts in 2 vintage minifigure packs in the 2010s, but it's easy to tell if you have an original by checking inside the torso. The newer version will have larger prongs. Another very subtle difference that applies to all minifigs is the shape of the head. Older heads have an ever so slightly more square shape, with this radius being a bit sharper. They'll oftentimes have a solid stud on top as well. She's the only one here to not get the classic smiley face print, and it's also worth pointing out that the green bandana is exclusive to her character. Her torso design is identical to the princess from King's Mountain Fortress, save for the color, and I like to imagine they're actually the same character, the princess having shunned her royalty to join Robin Hood's crusade against tyranny. Speaking of Robin Hood, which one of these guys do you think best represents him? I've seen a lot of folks cite this one, but I'm partial to this guy, and prefer to see the former as Little John. All in all, these minifigures are simply classic, and it's great that we get 5 in a set of this size. I also appreciate the variety of weapons, plumes, and hat colors we're given. Back to the main build. Much like yellow was used to represent gold, the 1980s and early 90s saw black used for most of the castle trees. Again, it's a charming quirk, but I think it would have been cool to see black trees reserved for the dark forest theme, and brown used for the Forestmen sets, instead of the other way around. But I guess we can't fault LEGO for not seeing nearly a decade into the future when they started this sub-theme. Despite its relatively simple construction, I think this tree looks amazing. There's branches going every which way, and even a vine for swinging down on any of Prince John's treasure convoys. I always love the look of these, although I'd prefer to see a few more. That's better. I also love how these branches on the left reach across to form an archway over the stream. A great design choice. Taking a closer look, you'll see that there's actually a large hollow space in the center. You could either imagine that indeed the tree is hollow, or, as I like to see it, there are in fact two trees here, and the branches are just intertwined at the top. Either way, this area is a great place to set up camp, or to stable your horse for the night. But if you don't like the look of it, a stack of black bricks smooths everything over, at least on this side. Because if we check the opposite side out, we'll find a ladder taking up the space. I like how this is kind of nestled in behind these leaves, and it reaches all the way to the top. In brown, this is a fairly rare element, only appearing in 3 sets. It's cleverly held in place by these brackets. If we go ahead and climb up, we'll find ourselves on one of these classic rope bridges, a part that was also just introduced in the previous year's Pirates theme. It spans the gap between the tree and the tower, giving our characters access to this small battlement. This spot is ideal for stationing an archer or a lookout, and we've got a red flag we can use to signal those on the ground if need be. Or I suppose it could just be for decoration. Once we're up here, however, we're kind of stuck, as there's no way down to the second level. If you got this set when it first came out in 1990, there wasn't really a quick and easy fix for this, but thankfully, 2 years later, LEGO introduced the ladder element, and the problem was solved. The second level is another great place to lie in wait for attackers, and there's a bit more room here for exercising your imagination. I've opted for a small armory to fill in the space. While there were several great sets in the Forestmen sub-theme, this one stands head and shoulders above the rest in my opinion. With its decent size, great minifigure selection, and unique design, it's the perfect backdrop for an infinite number of creative stories. And it'll look great on your shelf too. But there is one major downside to this set that I haven't mentioned yet, and that is the price. If I didn't know better, this looks like it should be right around $100 used. But you might be surprised to learn that just the base plate and Forest Woman add up to more than that. She is, after all, the 5th most valuable vintage castle minifigure at the moment, coming in at about $70, and the base plate is an easy $50. I was shocked to see that the average selling price for a used set on Bricklink is $300. Now, I've seen plenty for sale in the $250 range, but that still seems pretty steep to me, despite how much I love this set. So while I'd totally recommend this if the current value wasn't such a tough pill to swallow, you'll have to decide for yourself if you're willing to pay a king's ransom for it. And much to my chagrin, all of the Forestmen sets are fairly valuable, a testament to their popularity and collectability. It's my goal to showcase every set in the sub-theme for you guys, but you'll have to bear with me. Acquiring this series can be hazardous to your wealth. One thing's for certain, I couldn't come close to completing that goal without my favorite band of merry men and women, the members of Club Maniac. If you'd like to join in supporting the future of TrikBrix and enjoy some pretty great perks as a result, there'll be a link in the description. But that's all I've got for you today. If you enjoyed this video, give it a share and spread some nostalgia with your friends and family. We'll be traveling back to medieval times once again soon, but until then, this has been Jamie for TrikBrix. As always, take care and play well.